welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen Fospero. Sometimes out of unimaginable tragedy and deep loss comes profound good and positive change. Today I'll be talking to Figen Murray, OBE, whose 29-year-old son, Martyn, was murdered in the terror attack at the Ariana Grande concert at Manchester Arena on May the 22nd, 2017. 21 other innocent people were killed and 116 injured when an Islamic extremist blew himself up with a homemade suicide bomb and a rucksack packed with nuts and bolts. The lack of security at the venue was heavily criticised in the months that followed. 18 months on, at a Katie Melua gig, Figen realised just how vulnerable venues are to attack. This moment was the catalyst for a 6.5-year journey to bring about a new law to make venues safer and help prevent atrocities like Manchester. Figen is a psychotherapist, but studied for a master's in Counter Terrorism, using her newly acquired knowledge to doggedly lobby Prime Ministers, Home Secretaries, MPs and the Lords to bring about national change. She faced broken promises from Number 10, red tape, setbacks, and resorted to walking more than 200 miles from where Martyn lay dying at the arena to Downing Street to drive her message home. Finally, Martyn's Law, more formally known as the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act 2025, received Royal Assent from the King last April. Figen, it's so wonderful to meet you, and thank you for coming to our studio in London. You've been on an unexpected, challenging, emotional, and I'm sure at times infuriating journey, one which has needed strength, resilience, courage, determination, expert knowledge. How did you feel, Figen, last April when Martyn's Law finally got Royal Assent?
It was a really unbelievable moment, and I honestly thought at times we'll never get to that point. But we did it in the end, although there's a bit to go still with the implementation period, but it is now an official law, so I'm delighted about it.
The law has Martyn's name in the title, but I was surprised to learn that in the latter stages of the campaign, you stopped introducing yourself as Martyn's mum. What prompted that?
Yeah, so I've been doing lots and lots of presentations across the industry and at lots of conferences, always just saying, hi, I'm Martyn's mum. I stopped doing that when the legislation was debated in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, because in both houses there were comments made that were quite hurtful. And one of the MPs in the House of Commons, during one of the last debate sessions, stood up and said, well, we shouldn't be churning out legislation in the name of a dead person, and we need to step back and not feel sorry for victims. That hurt. And just when I recovered from that comment, the debate went over to the House of Lords a few weeks later, and one of the baronesses got up and said that Mrs. Murray is a fierce campaigner, as we all know, but we need to really take a big step back and not churn out legislation because we feel sorry for victims and their families. And again, that hurt, but it made me think, I am not a victim, and I'm not just a dead person's mum. I've actually worked really hard over the last few years to fight for this law, to get it to where it was, and acquired lots of knowledge. I embedded myself very strongly within the security industry with various roles I hold. So I've worked really hard. I'm not just some dead young man's mum. I've worked hard for it.
And of course, one of the aims of Martyn's Law is to save lives, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, totally. It's too late for Martyn. I can't bring him back. But actually, I have him at home on a bookshelf in an urn next to his poor little cat's ashes. I don't want any other family to be in that situation.
I think before we explore the journey you've been on and your story, I'd really like to hear about Martyn. From what I've heard just a little bit from you before we started to record the podcast today, he was one hell of a young man, wasn't he?
He was, and I think my husband Stuart is giving the best description of him. He always refers to Martyn as a one-man party, and you certainly knew when he was about, and it was always party time. He was just so fun to be around. Irritating as well, of course, at times. But I so wish I had that irritation back in my life now. One of his friends said one day, do you know, he made a 10-minute boring walk to a charity shop the best experience, the most fun experience ever. And that was him all over.
And you two had a very close relationship, didn't you?
Yes, we were very close. And we're very similar, actually, in personalities as well.
And after Martyn died, you heard from all sorts of people, including people in different parts of the world, about the impact that he'd had on their lives, even though some of these people he'd never met.
We had no idea, honestly. We all got lots and lots of messages. And in fact, my mobile phone provider actually phoned me. They got in touch with me and said, do you need a bigger contract because you're running out of data constantly? What's happened? And I explained it. And they actually gave me data free.
Did they?
As a result of what I told them. But on my phone alone, I had about 2,000 messages from all over the world. Lots of them from the UK as well. But there was one woman in particular, she messaged me with some photos of a few planks of wood that eventually developed into a full boat that was painted white with writing all over it. And she said, I've never met your son, but I heard about what happened to him. I heard about that hashtag Be More Martyn that went around. And I realized that I need to be more Martyn. I need to live life like Martyn, as if tomorrow never will happen and you can't waste a minute. So she said, I decided to leave the UK and move to the Gambia, where I'm originally from, and I want to live there and work there. And I commissioned a boat in your son's name. And that she named the boat hashtag Be More Martyn.
And you've got Be More Martyn tattooed on your wrist, haven't you?
Yes.
And also the other word that she told you about.
Yeah, so the other side of the boat was called Ubuntu. And my husband and I never really researched what that meant. You should never make assumptions. We just assumed it was the name of the town in the Gambia she moved to. We never checked it. And then years later, when we met the person who originated the hashtag Be More Martyn, who was a South African journalist, when I showed him the pictures of the boat, he went, oh my God, Ubuntu. And we said, yeah, what about it? Is that not the name of the town? And he said, are you telling me you don't know what Ubuntu means? And we said, no. And he said, that word is an African philosophy, which means I am because you are. We all need each other. It means community spirit. It means love, peace. He said it's one of those words that encompasses all those values that we need in our society to live with each other, like loyalty and trust and love and peace and all of those kinds of things. And we were absolutely over the moon. So the following year, when I explained it to my children what that word meant, they gave me a Mother's Day gift, a voucher for a tattoo, so that I can have Ubuntu tattooed on my arm.
That's so lovely. It's so lovely that you've got those sentiments on your wrist. I'm sure Martyn's never very far from your thoughts, Figen, but how can we all be more Martyn? He loved his music, he loved Coronation Street, he was a vibrant, lively, fun young man, wasn't he?
I think his philosophy was very much, which we realised even more after his death, that you shouldn't waste a minute, and every minute counts and every moment in your life counts, and you need to make the most of it.
Can you take me back to May the 22nd, 2017? I think you've described before it was a pretty ordinary day in your life, but when did you start to realise that something was wrong, Figen, and that Martyn was clearly in difficulty?
So it was an ordinary day. Stuart is a GP. He was at work. I was working in my home, in my basement, seeing clients. My two youngest daughters, who were the only two out of my 5 children still living at home. That evening, they were both in their respective bedrooms. Nikita, she was 16. She just started her GCSE exams and she was revising. She's very studious. Louise was in her bedroom with artwork all over the floor. She had to select some pieces for her undergraduate course at uni. She had an exhibition that was being marked, so she needed to select a couple of pieces. She felt really stressed in her bedroom. Stuart was doing paperwork. So nobody really had time to spend with me that evening. So I thought, well, just get to bed and have an early night. And Martyn, at the time, he lived about 1.5 miles down the road from us in a flat that we owned. I thought he's actually at home because he told me the day before that he hasn't packed for his trip to America, which he was going to go on that Wednesday, 2 days after he died. And I thought he's at home packing for his trip. Unbeknown to me, that was not the case. He actually decided to spend the whole day, it was a lovely sunny day, in Manchester with all his friends. And they were celebrating a couple of the birthdays in the group and his trip to America. He was in a very happy mood, and that evening they went to the concert, which again, I didn't know he's going. I didn't even know who Ariana Grande was, or that he was going to the concert. So that evening I went to bed at about 10 o'clock, fell asleep more or less instantly, but I'm a really light sleeper, and I became aware somebody is in the bedroom. And when I opened my eyes, it was my 19-year-old daughter Louise with my mobile phone. And that caused me an instant irritation. I said, "What are you doing with my phone?" I was annoyed. She woke me up, really. And she said, "Mum, I didn't mean to wake you. I was just checking if Martyn tried to text you or phone you." By that time, I was wide awake, sat up in bed, and I said, "Why would he ring me?" I looked at the clock. It was about 10 to 11. I said, "Why would he ring me at this time of night? Isn't he at home?" And she said, "No, he's in Manchester and he's gone to a gig with his friends at the arena, but there's been an incident and his mates keep phoning me and texting me. So I just thought, I'll check your phone." And I said, "What do you mean by incidents, Louise?" And she kind of stepped 2 steps back, nearly burst out crying and said, "Mum, there's been an explosion." She hadn't even finished that word. I ran past her. She followed me with my phone, ran down the stairs, and Stuart was just stood by the TV watching the news flash with people running and screaming. And I pointed at the TV. I said, "Martyn is there and his mates can't find him. I hope he's okay." And Stuart said, "Do you know, that's a huge place. It holds over 20,000 people. Chances of something happening to him are very, very low. I'm sure he's left early, like he does every concert," which was true, but that night wasn't the case. So Stuart said, "Look, please don't worry. He'll be absolutely fine." And Stuart said, "I'm going to go to bed. I've got work tomorrow." We've had this discussion afterwards. I think Stuart actually, deep down, had contemplated that something bad might have happened to Martyn, and he went to bed early to kind of store some sleep in case he needs it. And he was quite right to do so, because little did we know what was to come. So Louise and I stayed up. We made a cup of tea. We were continuing talking to his friends, who kept frantically ringing us. And every phone call, the sirens became louder and louder in the background. So we knew whatever it was big. And they were getting more and more distressed, crying on the phone, saying we can't find him. And I remember at one point saying to one of the girls he was with, I said, "Lana, you may have to consider that he might be dead." And that made her cry even more. I don't even know why I said that. I was probably already in shock a bit. And so in between the phone calls, Louise was checking the social media, because the news on the TV were very sparse at the time.
Was it?
Nobody really was saying what was happening. There was talk about the speakers being too near one of the balloons that popped, and that was the sound, but little did we know it wasn't. So there was lots of speculation on the news and on the internet. And it was probably about 11:15, about 45 minutes after the explosion, when I had a really strange feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I suddenly became aware that I can't feel him anymore. I had absolutely no sense of him whatsoever suddenly. It felt like somebody cut the connection with some giant scissors. It just went completely, as if he's not on the planet anymore. And I looked at Louise and I said, "I can't feel your brother anymore." Suddenly, I almost panicked. And it dawned on me, and I said, "You know, your brother's dead." And she got really upset, and I said, "I'm really sorry, but I honestly can't sense him anymore. I'm telling you, he's dead." And unfortunately, 24 hours later, that was then confirmed that he was one of the 22 people.
And who broke that news to you, Figen?
So the very early morning on the attack was on the Monday evening, very early morning on the Tuesday morning, because I hadn't gone to bed. There was a message on the TV just the once saying, if you need support and information, go to the Etihad football stadium. So Stuart and I went there in the morning, and Stuart never misses work. And when I told him I need to go to the Etihad stadium, he cancelled his surgery. That's unheard of Stuart. And he told me months later, because I said, why did you cancel? You never cancel work. He said, as soon as I heard you say Etihad Stadium, I couldn't let you go on your own, because I expected a football stadium, the whole grass covered in dead bodies, and you have to identify Martyn. I couldn't let you do that on your own. So that thankfully hadn't occurred to me at the time. But we went there because I wanted to know where his body was. So we were upstairs in the VIP area, and more families drifted in who were all looking like us for loved ones. And the room filled up with lots of people. There was lots of crying, screaming, distress, people in absolute despair. The sounds they were making, I never want to hear that again. Eventually, at lunchtime, the police introduced themselves and gave us as much information they could get. Bit by bit, every 2 hours, we had an update. And they were telling us that they have to put scaffolding on. They can't take the bodies out yet because the glass roof was in danger of collapsing. And of course, then the forensics had to go in. Finally, at 6 o'clock that evening, they took the bodies out one by one. And one table at a time was taken into a side room. And 10 minutes later, they'd come in tears, pick up their belongings and left. And we knew they had bad news. And by 22:10, there was only one more dead body, but two families, us and another family. And we were the family that was called into the room. We were told by our family liaison officer that Martyn was one of the 22 who died.
I can believe because I'm a mum, but that sixth sense that you had, you must be a spiritual person, I think, Figen, perhaps, if you sensed it wasn't there anymore.
Just mother's intuition, I guess. I don't know what it was, but I have heard of other mothers who had similar feelings and knew that their loved one had died.
I can't imagine, as a mum, the pain that you've all gone through. How did you and Stuart and the children cope and get through those early days?
Do you know, I always say that the bomber who detonated his bomb in the middle of this city room, he may as well have come to each of the families who lost a loved one and detonated that bomb in their lounge. Because when a terrorist attack happens and kills people in that horrendous way, it tears families apart. Now, as a family, we all function, we're all highly functioning individuals. We all coped. Nikita went and did her GCSEs. She sat all of them. She ended up with 11 A stars. I don't know how this girl did that. But I think whilst we all function, part of us is destroyed. And that is forever, that damage. It can't be fixed. Terrorist attacks destroy the fabric of who you are as a person.
And you lose part of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of me went that night. And I'm sure every family member in our family and in all the other families would say exactly the same.
And he walked in, didn't he, weighed down with the weight of a rucksack full of destructive material.
Yeah.
I suppose that's part of why you needed to change the law. But how on earth was he not spotted, Figen?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Which is why I'm working so hard on the legislation I've been working on. Mistakes were made. And you know what? It's so easy. The first response would be to get angry. But I've never, ever, from the word go, felt anger. And I absolutely reject to feel angry. I just refuse to. Because A, it doesn't bring Martyn back. And B, all these people who made mistakes that evening knows they've made mistakes. And I feel compassion for them because they have to, for the rest of their lives, get up every morning, look in the mirror and face that burden of guilt and possibly shame or the responsibility. And that must be an awful burden to carry every day for the rest of your life.
I'm sure it is. And other mums and dads and families were going through the same agony as you, all with different life stories. I think the youngest victim was 8.
Yes.
You show a photograph when you talk that I know was on the incident room for the police when this happened.
Yes.
It was a photograph of everybody who lost their lives as a very poignant reminder of how devastating that attack had been. But all of those families had different stories, didn't they? There were couples and children. And
and obviously we know a lot of the families because some of them sat through the inquiry with us and we got to meet them at various events. So it's heartbreaking.
It really, really heartbreaking. And 6 days after Martyn was killed, you had the next ordeal or stage of grief and loss when you were invited to go to the morgue. Tell me a little bit about that if you can, because I gather it was a more gentle experience and a kinder experience than you imagined it might be.
Yeah, it was. So I had never been to a morgue or seen a dead body, never mind my own dead child. So initially I didn't want to go because by day 6 I knew it was a bomb explosion. I knew Martyn was only 4 meters away from the bomber. So I had a fear that if he had lost limbs, how would I cope? Stuart, being a doctor, he said, I'm a scientific man, I need to go and see it's really him. I need to go. And he nearly left the drive and I thought, oh my God, this is the last opportunity to see him. So I ran out in my socks, knocked on the car window saying, wait for me, I'm coming, grabbed my handbag and my shoes and we drove. The only image I have of a morgue is what you see in crime films, where there's a dead person on a metal table with a toe tag, covered with a white sheet, and then there's a lab technician lifts the head bit while you stand behind the glass window. And that's what I fully expected to happen. And actually, the Hillsborough families, that's exactly what happened to them. They were not allowed to go anywhere near the dead bodies because they were seen as police evidence. So I fully expected that and wasn't looking forward to that at all. When we got there, it was a totally different experience. We were greeted by bereavement nurses. They made us tea and coffee, chatted to us, and then they said, let's take you down. And it was down one corridor, down another. And at the end, there were 2 doors. There was one at the front and one to the left. And the nurses said, we're going to be in this little room with a window and we're going to make sure you are okay. If you're not, we'll take you out. But you go in, he's there, take as long as you want, touch him, kiss him, hug him, sing to him, do what you want, he's all yours. And we walked in, the first thing that struck me is it was room temperature, no freezers. And I looked, no freezers, and it was set up like a private hospital room. And there he was in a bed, head on a pillow, very, very heavily bandaged up because he had severe head injuries. His arms were bandaged up, he had severe injuries on his arms and hands. But he was covered with a quilt, he looked asleep. And I thought, for that stupid moment, they've made a mistake. He's not dead, he's just asleep. And I thought, if I kiss him, he's going to open his eyes, like in the fairy tales. And I hurried to the right side of the bed. I kissed his lips. They were very, very pale, very gently. And the second my lips touched his body, I knew that they took him out of the freezer for our benefit. He was absolutely ice cold. And that gentle kiss was my realization that actually he's dead.
When you look back, Figen, was it really important that you saw
Absolutely.
him?
Yeah, it was important. I'm so glad I went. I'm so hard as it was. I never wished that on anybody. But hard as it was the last opportunity to see him properly.
And you gave him a magnificent send-off, didn't you? Do tell me about it, because I'm sure he would have loved what you did for him to celebrate his life.
Actually, that was down to Martyn himself.
It was, wasn't it? Tell me why.
Because we didn't know what kind of funeral to give him. I didn't even know, should we bury him, cremate him? No idea at all.
He was only 29, wasn't he?
Yeah, 29 and a half he was. But he used to always laugh and joke and say, I'm not going to see my 30th birthday. And he used to always say, I'm going to die a spectacular death. And one day after he died, one of his friends happened to be at our house and we were talking about the funeral, and I said, I have no idea what to do with the funeral. And he said, oh, he's got it all written down on his laptop. And we found it. The entire funeral was written out for us. He wanted to be cremated. That was a really important decision he took from us. He wanted 2 white horses and a white coach. He was gay. He wanted to go out like a diva. We gave him that, we granted that. He wanted everyone to be dressed in black with something fabulous, and people turned up in all sorts of ways they were dressed. He had 2 playlists, one for the funeral and one where we were not allowed to play those songs. So he had it all written down for us, and we're so grateful to him that he took that off us, those big decisions.
And you had a message from Mariah Carey.
Yes, so we had a message from Mariah Carey because he was an absolute super fan of hers. He worshipped the woman. In fact, the coffin lid was actually a full-size picture of Mariah Carey, and the side of the coffin were all his favourite divas from singing and from film, etc. But she left a 3-4 minute video recording that apparently it was very hard for her to do, but after a few attempts she managed it. And she left a lovely video message.
I wonder why, Figen, that age late 20s, why he had that sense that he might not make his 30th birthday.
Do you know what? I don't know whether he had a premonition, but the way he lived his life, I can only say he filled 2 lifetimes into one. Maybe he always knew his time is limited. He was meant to go to America on this trip. And funny enough, my ex-husband and his wife and I, with Stuart, we were all 4 of us sat one day and we were laughing and joking about this trip to America and saying we need to pull straws about which one of us 4 is going to go and rescue him when he gets himself into trouble in America. We fully expected one disaster after another because he was living so chaotically and so full on that we expected bad things to happen to him in the most chaotic way.
It was also really, really sad for his cat. He had a beloved cat. Tell me about Emily Bishop.
Yeah, so he named his cat Emily Bishop because he was a super fan of Coronation Street. They were besotted with each other, totally. And unfortunately, exactly 3 weeks after he died, she didn't wake up. And we were distressed, obviously, took her to the vet. And the lady, she knew who we were. She saw us on TV after what happened. And she said to us, this cat didn't die in any discomfort or pain. She said, look, her poor positioning and her facial expression are very relaxed. This cat decided not to wake up. She died of a broken heart. So I have them both in an urn next to each other at home. Him being a super fan of Coronation Street was actually kind of the reason why he ended up in the City Room in the first place, because during the last few songs, he and one of his friends who was sat with him went to the loo, and on the way back went and bought some more to drink. He had a glass of wine in his hand and his mobile phone in the other. As they were walking back to go back in, 2 girls stopped him to talk about his Deirdre Barlow tattoo on his leg, because he was on tattoo fixes a couple of years before that to have a Deirdre Barlow, actually it was Deirdre Rashid behind bars tattoo on his leg, and he often got stopped on the street. And he was chatting to them, and his friend said, I'll go back in. And his words to his friends were, yeah, I'll follow you in when I've finished talking to my fan club here. So he carried on talking to them. Then he was going to go back into the music area, the room, and security didn't let him in because by that time the concert had finished and people were coming out. So that's how he ended up staying in the City Room.
Gosh. Now, you're a psychotherapist, you're a wife, mum of 5, and not surprisingly at this stage of your life, didn't know much about counter terrorism, no more than we all absorb from when there is an atrocity. What prompted you, Figen, to study and do a master's in counter terrorism?
Yeah, you're right. I knew zero about security or terrorism. And don't get me wrong, I was aware of terrorism. But when you see it on the news and they always show people hugging and crying, and it's usually a school shooting or something in another country on the continent, and you think, oh, those poor, poor people. And then because of my job as a therapist, listening to bad stuff all the time, I didn't really want to hear more bad news because it wasn't relevant to me. This sounds really ignorant and horrible to say, but I didn't want to hear more bad stuff. So I used to always say, oh, shall we change the channel? What do you want? Shall we watch The Chase? Or what do you want for tea? I changed the subject. And I also thought, well, terrorism happens in other countries, maybe in London, but not up here where we are. So what an rude awakening I had when we suddenly became the headlines. I absolutely was astounded that it would happen to us as a family, but then the questions started. What is terrorism? Who are these people? Why would he blow himself up and kill himself? I couldn't understand. I didn't know what ideology meant. I didn't know what religious ideologies meant in connection with terrorism. And I thought, when did all this terrorism stuff start? I was obviously aware of the IRA, but I didn't understand all that. And I thought, are the government doing anything about terrorism? And the only way I could get answers was by educating myself. So the opportunity came to do a master's in counter terrorism. That was about 1.5 years, 2 years after Martyn died. And thank God I did the training, because it gave me the knowledge, because at that time I didn't know I'm going to be campaigning for years and talking to politicians. Thank God I did the course, which gave me the skills and the knowledge to actually talk in a professional way to all these politicians that I came across.
And it was a concert, wasn't it? A gig that you went to, I think with Stuart, a Katie Melua gig, where you had a seminal moment and realised 18 months after Martyn had died that something needed doing. What was that tipping point at the concert?
Yeah, so the first year I was pretty zombie-like, and obviously I'd lost my job because my job died the same day as Martyn. I realised I can't do my job anymore because my worldview had changed completely at that moment. But in the second year, my children bought Stuart a Father's Day gift, 2 concert tickets for Katie Melua, which he quite enjoys listening to. But the concert, although it was a Father's Day gift in the June, it wasn't until 2nd of December that year. And in 2018, that December, I remember getting ready and changing my handbag to my smallest handbag to make the bag search easy, because I fully expected top-notch security, in particular in Manchester, where the attack happened. And we got there, Stuart gets his concert tickets out. We walked in, staff turned round and looked at us and then turned away and carried on talking. Nobody even checked our entrance tickets, never mind any bag searches. We went upstairs, sat down, and I was anxious the whole time because on the left of us there were some people, because it was December, people were Christmas shopping. There was a shopping centre near the theatre, and they had loads of bags there. And I thought, oh my God, nobody searched these bags. What, anything could be in there. So I was terrified, really. And during the concert, Stuart suddenly realised I'm crying. And he whispered, it's the songs, isn't it? And I said, I'm not even listening to the stupid songs. And he looked confused and he said, why are you crying then? I said, because nobody searched my bag. I was devastated that 18 months after 22 people, a lot of them kids, were killed. Here we are in a music concert in the town where it happens, in the city where it happened, and nobody did any security checks. It was business as usual. And I could not believe it. And that's the first time I became curious about security at venues. And I started looking into it, found the government's contest strategy document, which is the official counter-terrorism strategy document of this country. And there it was in that document, security at venues is a recommendation. It was non-mandatory. Anybody could do it if they wanted to, or they don't.
And so is that where the idea was born, that you needed to get on it and make a change?
So I'm nobody special. I'm just one lay person who saw that gaping hole that existed. And I thought, I can't let this happen. I'm not having this. And that's when I started in the January. The concert was 2nd of December. I did all my research. And then in January, I started my online petition.
And that was on the government website, wasn't it? So you decided to do it on the government website.
Yeah, because right from the word go, I wanted the government on board. And they only last 6 months and then they automatically stop. And I had about 23,500 signatures, which sound a lot, but weren't really a lot.
There were other things people cared more deeply about, weren't there?
Yeah. So on the same site, halfway through mine, 2 other ones happened, and they got thousands and thousands of signatures in a very quick succession. You could almost see the counter turn. And one was Bring Back the Jeremy Kyle Show, and one was Bring Back Plastic Straws for McDonald's, because people struggle sucking up milkshake with a paper straw, and I can tell you how to do it because I've done it. You buy the milkshake and then put it on the table and leave it alone for 7-8 minutes, and then you start drinking
and
it.
Then your paper straw's okay. So
Yes.
when you've got your 23,000 signatures, what then happens when you've got a government petition?
I was so naive in those days. This is, of course, before I studied. I was so naive. I thought, but if I get enough signatures together, the government, because it's a government website, they'll bring a law in. I was so naive. Little did I know how much work it would actually take in reality, and that soon after that it would turn into a full-time job for me.
And what, in broad terms, did it involve? What was the process like?
So Brendan Cox got in touch with me. His wife, Jo Cox MP, was murdered the year before Martyn and the others were killed in 2016. She was murdered by a right-wing extremist. So he said, look, this is who I am. This is what happened to my wife. I've seen your petition. I think it's the right thing to do. I have contact with politicians. I can sit you in front of the security minister. But he said, I'm not into security. I don't understand security. I need you to meet somebody who understands security and produces a white paper, because we can't go empty-handed in front of the minister. So he told me to go and meet Nick Aldworth at Scotland Yard. Off I went on Valentine's Day 2019, met Nick Aldworth, and he said, I'd love to do it, but I can't because I'm actually working here and it's a conflict of interest. He must have seen my disappointed face, and then he said, but if you wait till May, I retire in May. So I said, yes, please, let's wait till May. May came, he immediately started on the white paper, and that September, when it was finalised, we sat in front of the first of 7 security ministers.
7 security ministers, and I think you spoke to about 5 prime ministers,
5
didn't
prime
you?
ministers and 5 home secretaries, yeah.
What did the prime ministers, various prime ministers, because we had quite a few over that period, what did they say, and who was most supportive and helpful?
Well, actually, across all parties, nobody really objected to the legislation because it's needed. So it always had cross-party support, but I didn't anticipate how slow the wheels of government turn. It was a complete eye-opener to me, and I never anticipated it's going to take years. We also had COVID into the equation. That delayed it. We had all sorts of issues. We had changes in leadership several times. And Rishi Sunak in December 22, he phoned me at home and he said, I promise you in the new year, I'm going to get this moved forward. He said, I don't know why it's taken so long. We need to get this through. I believed him. And then a few months later in spring, we had a meeting with the people from the Home Office. They had set up a department up just for Martyn's Law. So we met them on a fairly regular basis, either on Teams or face-to-face. It happened to be a face-to-face meeting that didn't go so well. And outside the Home Office, I said to Brendan, well, this wasn't a good meeting. I said, I'm disappointed. They're backtracking a bit. I feel like it's being watered down. This isn't going well. I feel like doing a protest march from Manchester to London to Number 10 and shame the government into this. And he laughed. He said, don't be daft. You don't need to do daft things like that. That's crazy. He said, let me go and see if I can find out more information and talk to some of my friends in government. And I went home. Months passed. And then in the January, Brendan phoned me and he said, that conversation outside the Home Office a few months ago about a walk. And I said, yeah. He said, you need to do the walk. You need to practice. You need to arrive on the 7th anniversary at Number 10. So that was in the January 24. I told my husband Stuart, and Stuart immediately said, oh my God, we need to practice walking. We need to get fit. And he dragged me out from that phone call onwards. Every Saturday and every Sunday, he dragged me out, no matter what the weather was.
So you did that walk because those promises really were broken and the process was just being slow. The plan for the new law seemed to be being diluted. And so you walked more than 200 miles. I mean, no wonder you needed training, Figen. That's a long, long way.
We couldn't have
16 days, was it?
We couldn't have done it without practicing and training. Yeah, 16 days. We couldn't afford to take a day off, unfortunately, because we had to arrive at a certain day. We walked 6 to 8 hours a day.
And you started where Martyn died?
Yeah, that was important to me. We started from the exact spot where he lay dead.
And then what was that walk like?
Grueling at times, because it was one day it was really roasting hot, nearly 30 degrees. Other days it rained non-stop all day and it was quite cold. So it was really tiring. And I also had a poorly hip to start with. I already had osteoarthritis for about 10, 12 years before the walk. I was a bit dubious whether I can even finish the walk. But I had lots and lots and lots of painkillers throughout the walk.
And a GP by your side.
Yeah, so he looked after the whole team. We were all needing his support with painkillers and all sorts. But the last 3 days were absolute agony. I was on the verge of asking for a wheelchair or crutches. I honestly thought I can't do it, but the determination and sheer grit, I kept thinking, one more step, just do it. And I just carried on walking. In fact, some woman put on Twitter, this woman clearly has mobility issues, which made me laugh, that comment. But we got there, and 6 weeks later, I had a hip replacement.
And the timing of the walk was essential.
Yeah.
The reason you couldn't take a day off, you had to get there for maximum impact on the 7th anniversary, didn't you?
Yes.
But also the timing of what time you actually arrived in Downing Street ended up, with hindsight, being rather critical.
It was, because the time of the meeting kept changing throughout the day. And we ended up seeing Rishi Sunak and James Cleverly about 12:30 or 12:40. Had it been hours later, the meeting, because there was at one point 2:30 as a suggestion, it would have been for nothing, the walk, because 2-3 hours after our meeting, Rishi Sunak announced the general election and the media would have homed in on the election frenzy and the walk would have been for nothing.
So when you saw Rishi that day at the end of your more than 200-mile walk, did he then say that the law was going to go through and get Royal Assent?
Well, he just said it'll be pushed forward, but obviously that didn't happen through Rishi Sunak. Half an hour after we met Rishi Sunak and James Cleverly, we were then introduced to Keir Starmer. And he said to me, I promise you, if I ever become Prime Minister, I will push this through as soon as possible. That'll have priority. And I smiled and thanked him and thought, I heard this promise before from a Prime Minister and I was polite. But do you know what? He kept his promise. And in September that year, it was introduced into Parliament through all the debates. And 3rd of April last year, it became an Act of Parliament.
And you told people along the way, senior politicians, possibly prime ministers, I'm not sure, that you might be 5 foot in stature.
Yeah.
But didn't you describe yourself as like a mosquito that just wouldn't go away?
That was the very first security minister we met. That was Brandon Lewis. And in those days, I was more a leggings and black T-shirt girl. I wasn't used to fancy clothes. And I knew I had to go to the Home Office to meet a minister. And I was completely scared because I'd not been to London hardly. And I went and bought a dress that I felt really uncomfortable in. So we sat, and I was sat with Nick and Brendan, and I hardly knew the guys because I'd only just met both of them. So I was with total strangers in this room with the minister and his entourage, loads of people in suits in front of me. And it was really intimidating. And I was sat there. Nick and Brendan did all the talking. And I thought, please don't ask me anything. I hope I don't need to speak. And then Brendan said, before this meeting ends, this is your meeting, Figen. Is there a final word for the minister you have? And I looked and I said, actually, yes, I do. And I said, as you can see, Minister, I'm only a short woman. I'm only about 5 foot-ish. But I said, I did read somewhere that if you think small is not effective, you have never been in bed with a mosquito. I'm the mosquito, and I will be buzzing around yours and the government's head until this is done. I'm not going anywhere.
And so you did. More than 6.5 years, you got your head down and you studied and you campaigned and you did the petition and you made this happen. Why is Martyn's Law so important, Figen?
Because this will save lives. It means that any venue from 200 people capacity and above have to, by law, keep you safe. That isn't straight away, because when laws are brought out, There's usually an implementation period where people can get themselves prepared and do all the necessary stuff to start implementing the law. So there is a 2-year implementation period, so about 10 months of that is gone now. But after that implementation period, everybody should feel so much safer because venues will have the knowledge how to recognize danger, how to lock people in safely, how to evacuate and hide in the building if the danger comes in, how to evacuate safely. And that is all part of what Martyn's Law is all about. So venues will have that knowledge and know what to do and be prepared.
And it sounds like a lot of it is common sense. You can't put a price on people's lives, but it isn't like an eye-watering spend. It's some common sense measures that it's clearly surprising have never really been there in the first place.
Yeah. So the government has established 2 tiers. What they call the standard tier is for venues with 200 to 799 people capacity. They don't have to spend any money at all or change anything in their building. They just need to make staff aware so that every member of staff knows in an emergency how to lock the building down quickly, how to evacuate, and how to notify the authorities and also talk to staff and customers and let them know. No money needs to be spent on that at all. The bigger venues, any venue 800 plus, right up to the big arenas and stadia, obviously they may have to invest something. They need to do all the stuff that the standard tier needs to do, but they need to make sure they have good CCTV provision. They may have to train their staff a bit better and they may have to buy equipment depending on the size of their building. It's very proportionate. It's not there to ruin businesses or anything.
Not at all, but to save lives.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
how do you think the terrorism landscape has changed over the last decade?
Yeah, it has changed phenomenally because up to 2014, we all knew the IRA, everybody is aware of it, and the IRA were never really into carrying out mass casualties. They were not after killing lots and lots of people. They want to make political points, and they always gave a bit of a warning. And in 2014, an ISIS spokesperson went online and the message went viral in a very quick period of time. And he basically said, kill the infidel by any means. Use a knife, use a car, use poison, use fire, throw them from a height. And you don't need permission from us as an organization. You don't need to go and practice how to use rocket launchers. Just go and kill them. That is not to say that ISIS are the only terrorists. There's obviously a lot of right-wing terrorism and people out there who try to cause harm to society with all sorts of different mixed ideologies. So there's a mixed bag really out there. So there's danger out there. And since that video went viral, unfortunately, self-initiated terrorism has become a thing all across Europe. And we see attacks with vehicles, knives, all sorts of different attacks all over the continent and, of course, in the UK as well.
How are you now using, Figen, your counter terrorism qualification to get the story out, to get the message out, and particularly to children? I think you've spoken to more than 30,000 school children. Yeah,
it's nearly 35,000. And I became aware when I started my education that people get radicalized online. And I thought, oh my goodness, because the terrorist, I know it sounds daft, but I was never really upset with him either. And I actually went on national TV with my husband on the red sofa on BBC, and I publicly forgave him because I figured at the age of 22, he could not have known what he was doing. And I thought, no, you were born an innocent baby. Somebody poisoned your mind. And therefore, I was never able to be cross with him somehow. But it dawned on me that young people are very vulnerable and susceptible to ideologies. And that's when I started going to schools. With my training that I've done since, I know the tactics these terrorist recruiters use online. So I tell young people, these are the sort of tricks these people use. These are who they target. This is the sort of things they'll try and tell you and persuade you. This is how you recognize whether you are in the process of being radicalized, and this is how you can get help. And that is really important. And I also tell young people about kindness and that they are the generation who can turn things around with forgiveness, kindness, and all these values that society seems to have lost.
Martyn's death has had such a ripple effect of kindness and goodness that's come from what you've done. How have you changed, Figen, as a mum, as a woman, as a person since Martyn's death?
It's really hard to answer that. I'm very different to the person I was. I used to be a really shy introvert. I used to hate crowds, and I felt uncomfortable with lots and lots of people around me. My job as a therapist suited me because I was working in my basement, mainly on the one-to-one, and that was just enough people. And when Martyn died, I was approached a few months after his death by our member of the European Parliament, of course before Brexit. And he said, we're doing something on terrorism in Brussels. Would you come and speak at the European Parliament? And I heard myself say yes. And I went. And it was all incredibly bewildering. But I did it and was a bit surprised at people's reaction. And from there on, I got invited to speak about what happened. And I lost my fear of people and of crowds because the worst thing already happened to me. Nothing can be as bad as losing Martyn. So my fear went.
And do you think Martyn would be very proud of everything you've doggedly campaigned for and managed to finally achieve?
I think if you ask my husband, he would probably say Martyn's almost reincarnated through me and he's the one doing all this. It's very Martyn-driven, all this. I often say he sat on my shoulder, egging me on, saying, go on, Mum. I'm hoping that he would be happy that he didn't die for nothing and that his name actually means something and saves lives in the future.
I think we should all be a bit more Martyn. I think
Absolutely.
We should take that away. We also just should do a final mention for the former Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Neil Basu, who was kind enough to introduce us. And of course, he was at the arena in the aftermath of the attack. He describes you as the most inspirational person he's ever met. I agree with Neil. Has he been a big support throughout this?
He's been absolutely incredible. I think the reaction of people like Neil and so many others who never met us, but because it was such an unprecedented, massive, big, overwhelming event, everybody was so shocked. And obviously Neil and all the others really had compassion for us. They stepped out of their professional facade and met us on a human level, and Neil has done that, definitely.
I think there was a lot of shock within the police. Detectives, they're used to seeing dreadful things, but I think the Manchester Arena attack had a big impact on everybody who was there that night and who helped in the aftermath. It was such a human story.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a real pleasure to meet you. This podcast is all about inspirational people, Figen, and they don't come much more inspirational than you. So thank you for taking your time and for being in London. You're heading back to Manchester now, aren't you? So congratulations on not giving in and just carrying on. It's so important.
Still buzzing around.
Still buzzing around.
You.
I feel you haven't finished yet, Figen. There's going to be more wonderful stuff that you do, but thank you. You've been listening to Figen Murray, OBE, who has succeeded in changing the law to help us all feel safer in venues. Martyn's Law received Royal Assent last year. You can download and subscribe to our series at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation. We're on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back next week. Join me then.